Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the live and to another absolutely action-packed day of the Murdaugh murders trial. You expect really by this time absolutely nothing less in the Murdaugh trial. It's so fascinating because it's not just one case. It's a case within a case within a case. And that's exactly what the defense is complaining about. We're going to get into all of that today. If you don't know the case, the two-sentence summary is that Alex Murdaugh is a now disbarred attorney who is accused of 99 different financial crimes, including stealing from his clients, his own brother, his law firm. But this case, this trial right now, is the murder trial where he is accused of murdering his own wife and son, shooting them at his hunting lodge while they were near the dog kennels just hanging out. So be sure to like the video while I remember to say it. And thank you, Anna Lee, for reminding everyone. And be sure to subscribe. FOMO is real in this case. If you miss a day, you have missed something wild. You do not want to miss out. And also follow me on Twitter at LawyerLeeW. I'm going to divide today into 4 different parts. The first is going to be what the jury heard. And then I'm going to do a special part on the really critical thing that the jury heard today. And then I want to talk about something really interesting, and that's the stuff we got to find out about that the jury doesn't even know about yet. And the judge will be deciding what they will get to hear and what they won't get to hear. And then the fourth thing is I'm going to give a little sneak preview about what's coming on Monday. And because we got some hints about what's going to be next. So let's first start about what the jury heard. Now, the part of this is going to be super critical. The defense wanted to keep that part out, but they were not able to. But we started off with fingerprint examiner Tom Darnell from SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And he said, I found that frankly, a little bit frustrating because it was basically like, yeah, we didn't get nada. So that was, I thought, super frustrating. What he said was, you rarely get a fingerprint from a cartridge case or a shot shell, and they didn't really find any. But then that's kind of normal. He said there wasn't any usable evidence from any of the guns. But then that's common too. Also, I will say this, fingerprints on the guns that were owned by the Murdaughs, I don't really see what they would have been useful for, because the fact of the matter is, of course, they're going to have Murdaugh's fingerprints on them. They're his guns. So I don't think that would have been a huge thing. He also said that latent prints are just very fragile, and therefore it doesn't take a lot to obliterate one. He said he didn't even, and I thought this was odd, he didn't even find, and the defense did too, he didn't even manage to find a print on the gun that Alex Murdaugh was holding when the police arrived. And he said that doesn't surprise him because you can touch things and not leave a fingerprint. So that was kind of the way that testimony came out. He also said that no one from the SLED latent print department was even at the scene on the day of the murders, but that's not surprising. He said usually someone else collects the evidence and sends it in to them. So overall, I thought that was pretty disappointing. I don't know that it ever could have proven anything, but it really, really didn't. So that was, there you have it. Then we went really rapid fire through 4 witnesses introducing buccal swabs for DNA, and they went through a series of people. What was more interesting was who got swabbed, as opposed to, this was simply to introduce the swabs. It didn't really provide any evidence. But the people who were swabbed who were really surprising, maybe, or particularly interesting, were Anthony Cook, who was involved in the boat crash case. If that was Mallory Beach's boyfriend. Now, if you don't know, from the beginning, from the 911 call, Alex Murdaugh said, the reason my son was shot is because people were retaliating for the boat wreck case. The boat wreck case involved a boating under the influence charge against 22-year-old Paul Murdaugh. Now, he's one of the people murdered. And Paul Murdaugh had been driving the boat when it wrecked, killing a young woman, Mallory Beach. That's the allegation, and he was about to go on trial for that. the Murdaughs were also being sued because Paul Murdaugh tested as being heavily under the influence at the time of the wreck, or at least was charged with that. And therefore, there was a suit not just against Paul, it also was against his brother, Buster. Paul was using his older brother Buster's license and was able to buy alcohol that way. And the boat, of course, belonged to Alex Murdaugh, the person on trial now. And Alex Murdaugh was being sued for having let his son use the boat and things like that. So there was a lot of animosity toward the family, according to Alex Murdaugh. And he said, particularly against Paul, and that's why Paul was killed. So and I assume then SLED actually listened to what Alex said, and they actually took a swab from Anthony Cook, Mallory Beach's boyfriend, who was involved in the boat crash case, and also from Connor Cook. Connor Cook also was involved in the crash, and he was the person Paul Murdaugh fingered as having been driving the boat. Everyone else in the boat said, no, it was Paul driving the boat. So there was particularly perhaps an issue that could have led to bad blood right there. Then there were two other survivors of the boat crash, Morgan Dowdy and Miley Altman, all of whom were tested. There were some who had not really been talked about before, like H. Torres. A lot of speculation, like, who is that? Why was that person tested? But in any event, we know nothing about the results other than that they tested these particular people. So and there was a statement today that the Murdaughs were being investigated for obstruction of justice. And that's for trying to pin the boat crash on Connor Cook rather than on Paul Murdaugh. Then there was one very important witness that the jury heard today, and that was a SLED agent, Paul Greer. This was something that had been talked about before, but it was now put before the jury as opposed to just a proffer to the judge. And this person, Paul Greer, is a firearms expert. So here's what he talked about. Now, the defense wanted him out. They made a pretrial motion saying what he's talking about is too speculative. There's no way he can really take casings and marks on casings and definitively say that they came from such and such a gun. That's not science. And so that's what the argument was about. But the judge let the testimony in. And so what he talked about was the fact that he tested various guns. He looked at various guns at the scene, including firing some. He looked at the gun Alex had, the 12 gauge, and it was loaded. You may remember the defense pointed out with 12 gauge and 16 gauge. The 16 gauge should not have been in there. And the defense said, well, okay, that shows how distracted Alex Murdaugh was and how upset that when he got a gun to defend himself, he took that 16 gauge and put it on top of that. And it was a mistake. I mean, he would never have done that if he had been in his right mind and not so upset and frightened. So that particular gun testimony, the SLED agent agreed with what the defense said. He said, yeah, you wouldn't normally put that in a gun. He agreed with that much. His testimony was he eliminated two guns that did not fire the shots at Paul. Paul was killed by a 12 gauge gun, but he was able to eliminate some of the guns that the Murdaughs had and say it won that gun and it won this gun. But he said when he got to the 12 gauge gun that Alex Murdaugh had with him, that he said he went and got to protect himself because he was afraid. He said the testing was inconclusive and he couldn't tell whether it was the same gun. He also said he matched some blackout casings to the blackouts that the Murdaughs still had in their gun room. That was Buster's gun. Both Paul and Buster had blackouts, and Paul's is missing. Not just one, but two of Paul's are missing. One had been missing for years, but the other one is also missing. Currently, the Murdaughs have one. They should have three. So two are gone. He also said that it was inconclusive whether the blackout that was in the Murdaugh's gun room matched what was actually used to shoot Maggie. And that is one of the critical parts of the case, is that two different guns were used. One gun killed Paul, a different one killed Maggie. And one of the things that the defense and others have said is, how does one person manage to do that? How does one person, get one gun, drop it, get another, and run all around? It seems unlikely. So that's sort of been the argument. Now, he also talked about blackout shells near Maggie's body, and he found they were identical to shell casings he found 2 other places on the property. One was right up by the door of the house, and the other was at the shooting range. This was important because he's saying one gun fired all of those. So it's pretty unlikely that it would be somebody who wasn't regularly on the property. It seems like it would be someone who was. If the gun shells are all over the property in 3 different spots, then it's not a one-time thing where somebody came on, shot somebody, and left. He also talked about finding bullets that were the same size as the bullets used in rifles that Murdaugh owned. I didn't really think that took it anywhere, but he was just saying it was all possible. So let's get into what the cross said, because in cross-examination, the defense got onto this and said, look, it's possible that the gun that Alec used at the scene fired the shotgun shells near Paul's body, or is it? And as they broke it down, the witness kind of said, well, okay, yeah, it could have been the one that Alex had, or it could not have been the gun that Alex had. And some of the 300 blackout cartridges I found could have been fired by the blackout that was in the gun room or not, which was pretty unspecific. I mean, it wasn't something that nailed it down for people. I thought, again, a little bit of frustration there with what the evidence was from the prosecution. So he said one of these could be the murder weapon, but he can't say for sure. And he said he also mentioned, and I thought this was pretty critical, that when he was ejecting spent shells and feeding new ones into Buster's gun, it wasn't working correctly. He had to manually cycle it, which is not normal with that gun. It should be able to rapid fire, and he couldn't. I think that's important because of how many shells there were around Maggie. It doesn't seem very likely that somebody shot one shell, ejected, shot one shell, ejected. It just seems like that probably wasn't the gun. The defense hasn't gotten into that, but I believe that'll be their argument. So the defense then went straight to the point they really wanted to make, which was they think this is nonsense, not real science. And they said, are you assuming that every gun leaves unique individual tool prints on a shell casing? And the defense lawyer tried really hard to get a yes or no. Just come on, give me a yes or a no. Are you saying it's like a fingerprint, basically? Are you saying that this is a fingerprint for the gun and you can always tell? And the judge didn't really force that. Basically, what the witness said was, well, it looks to me like I haven't seen every single 300 blackout, but the ones I've seen usually do produce unique markings, which wasn't at all the definitive answer that I'm sure the prosecution wanted. I thought it did undermine his testimony. The defense is saying, this is a mass-produced firearm. There are lots and lots like this, and they may create substantially similar tool markings. So if you can't say this is unique, this testimony is not helpful to the jury. If anything, it's confusing. So at this point, the redirect, the prosecution got him to say that he was 100% sure that the markings on the shell casings at the 3 locations on the property all matched. That was important because it does mean the same gun fired it. Maybe it's the other blackout that's one of the other 2 blackouts that's missing. Maybe it's yet another blackout, but for sure they matched. He said that. Then he also said he had actually been in a study where he was able to repeatedly differentiate between the markings made by mass-produced guns that were built in the same facility with the same parts and materials. So I thought this testimony overall, just to sort of give you my thoughts on it, seemed kind of inconsistent. I felt like they just kept saying they were unable to test for a lot of things that might have helped Murdaugh, and I didn't feel like either the fingerprint or the gun testimony was strong. And that's probably because they're missing the gun. The guns that committed the murders are missing. So one of the questions I have, and I want to get people's thoughts. Oh, and also I want to say thank you to Mr. RN. Thank you. What is your thought on the fact that the guns are missing? Is that a deal breaker? Like, if they can't find the guns, they can't prove Alex Murdaugh did it? Do you think it's not that big a deal? I'm just curious what people think. So, and at this point, let me remember again to say, please do like the video so it'll get out to more people, and subscribe. We are covering this throughout the trial. We're going to be covering it every night. And you, trust me, don't want to miss it. Because right now I'm going to get into the part that we got to hear that the jury did not. And this is the juiciest part without question. The first person we heard from early in the morning was Jan Malinowski. He is the CEO of Palmetto State Bank. He was also part of the executive committee that approved loans, and all kinds of stuff came out during this testimony. In July, there was a $750,000 loan made to Alex Murdaugh from Palmetto State Bank. At least that's what we're told. At that point of that money, and when I say we're told, there was no documentation. Nobody wrote that down. And boy, if you can get a loan like that, I started to title this the way every bank should treat customers, because you don't have to actually sign anything or fill out any documentation. $750,000 loan. Here you go. $350,000 was immediately wired to Chris Wilson Law Group IOLTA. What that means is that Chris Wilson was the attorney who testified yesterday. Chris Wilson was, I have to say was, Alex Murdaugh's best friend, close friend. They were handling cases together. They handled a case together that was specific. It was a personal injury case, and they got a recovery in that case. So Alex's firm and Chris Wilson's firm were going to split the money from that case. So Chris Wilson got the money in, and he said, okay, you're supposed to have $792,000 as your firm's fee. And Alex Murdaugh says, I want you to write that to me personally. The firm has approved that. And the firm says you can write it to me personally. Had him write it in a couple of different checks, because he said, I'm going to buy a structured settlement for my fee so that I get payments down the line instead of taking it all this year. As I understand it, that he said that's not tax related. I'm just trying to structure, I don't know, retirement. I don't know if he was clear on why. Well, what happened was that this money, apparently, PMPED, Alex Murdaugh's firm, had never approved this. PMPED had no idea that Alex Murdaugh was taking this money personally. So they find out that Chris Wilson has written a check, has settled the case, and they're like, where's our money? So Chris Wilson says, look, you have the money, you need to give it back so I can pay your law firm, because they don't think you were supposed to get it personally. So $350,000 was wired to Chris Wilson to make up for this money that had been pulled out. At this point, though, the loan was not on the system. It was listed as sender instead of Alex Murdaugh. Why? Because there was no documentation on the loan. That's what the CEO testified. So then in August, all this stuff is brewing and swirling around Alex Murdaugh. And a board member, Norris Lafitte, writes an email saying, hey, I want an accounting of the relationship that Alex Murdaugh has to the bank. Like, what all is he into us for? Because I'm worried. The response then was huge. First of all, there was activity to create the loan that was never documented in July. So there was approval by Russell Lafitte, who was the CEO of the bank, or CFO, I forget which, and who had made the loan to Alex Murdaugh, along with his dad and sister. And the three of them approved it. There's dispute over whether that was even proper. In addition, they generated documents and had Alex Murdaugh sign as if the documents had been made in July, but this is August, and the current CEO says that's incorrect because we can tell from the numbering system this wasn't done in July, it was done in August. We can tell it by this number, it couldn't have been done. They also began to backdate or change what the purpose of the loan was. At no point did they ever say that the purpose of the loan was to pay Chris Wilson $350,000, or, and this was another thing they used it for, well, let me tell you one more fact before I get to that. So they first said this loan is for a business expense. And then they said, no, it's collateral for the beach house that the Murdaughs own at Edisto Beach. A later memo to the board said, yeah, what they were doing was remodeling the Edisto Beach house, and that's why they needed this money. Now, that would not explain, of course, why $350,000 was sent to Chris Wilson's IOLTA account. That wouldn't explain that, but that's what they told the bank. And there were problems with that, the CFO said, of the bank. He said, look, this house was in Maggie's name, not Alex Murdaugh's name. He also said the house was already mortgaged, so there wasn't enough collateral to justify a loan. We wouldn't have made a loan based on so little collateral as there was because the house already had a loan. And he also said, while there was supposed to be an appraisal the very day after the murders, that was because they were going to refinance the loan they already had. This was not to get a brand new loan for $750,000. And meanwhile, and this is the point I was holding, Alex Murdaugh had a $350,000 overdraft. And if I understood correctly, he ran that all up between the June murders and August, $350,000 overdraft. And so the bank took $400,000 of that loan and they put it into his checking account and said, okay, he's no longer in overdraft. The prosecutor made a great, but he said, so Alex Murdaugh had a $350,000 overdraft and the bank kept paying? Perhaps the most generous overdraft policy ever seen, correct? And, you know, the entire courtroom laughed at that because it does seem like, gosh, the way we all wish our banks would treat us, right? So then on August 17th, the witness said there was a bank board meeting and the board was informed that Alex Murdaugh owed $3.544 million in loans to the bank. Some of that was collateralized, some of it wasn't. Plus, he also owed some loans that were so old and they had actually been charged off as bad debt. Even though, and this was the defense point, apparently and bizarrely, even though they had been charged off, he would occasionally make payments on them, I guess just when he had money. So the prosecution made the point that he had $1 million line of credit that was pretty much maxed out. And the prosecutor asked this, if it had come out that Alex Murdaugh was stealing money from clients or his partners and had been forced to resign from his law firm, the bank would not have continued to pay charges coming in on that account, would they? And he said, no, we would not have done that. The prosecutor also pointed out that Russell Lafitte, the CFO who made these payments, I've gone back and forth, CFO and CEO. I think I'm going to go with CFO, that Russell Lafitte has been removed as CFO and replaced, and that Russell Lafitte has now been convicted of crimes, these exact things that we're talking about now. He was convicted in federal court. Now, the cross-examination, sort of like yesterday, what I talked about was really weak. They have, based on the questioning, pretty much nothing in terms of what the evidence is going to be to refute these financial crimes. They apparently don't really have a lot to say, but they do have an argument that some of these are not relevant and should not come into the case. And the judge is going to have to make that decision. Here's what the defense is saying. They're saying that all of this trauma with the bank and this, July loan and really wasn't made in July. It was really made in August. All of that's after the murders. So he wasn't under pressure with the bank. Nobody at the bank was suspecting he was insolvent. No one from the bank was refusing to make loans. He was totally fine in June. And so that had nothing to do with the murders. And Judge, you should keep it out. Now, that's going to be a very difficult argument for the judge to figure out, for the judge to piece out. The prosecution is saying this is all even though he was not personally already having to deal with the bank, he knew that it was a problem. He knew that he was out of money. He knew he was running out of money, but this is going to be a difficult thing for the judge to decide. This is not a definite, it comes in, I think, on this loan in particular. Then we heard some very, it wasn't emotional, but it was very moving testimony, I thought, from Michael Tony Satterfield. And he's 33 years old, works at a hospital. His mother worked for Alex and Maggie Murdaugh for, I believe he said it was 25 years. She cleaned their house, helped them with chores or things they needed around the house. She fell down the stairs at Moselle, hit her head, lived for a few weeks. I don't believe she ever recovered. She never communicated what happened and died. Alex Murdaugh told her two sons, he said, let me go after my insurance company and get the medical bills paid for you and get a little money for you, for your brother. Let me get you some money out of this. So Tony Satterfield said, Alex Murdaugh was my lawyer. He said, he brought in another lawyer saying, I've got a conflict of interest, so we'll bring in Corey Fleming. But I always thought of Alex Murdaugh as my lawyer. And they then brought in Chad Westendorf from Palmetto State Bank and said, he's going to be your personal representative. And he said, it didn't matter. I still contacted Alex Murdaugh. I thought Alex was my attorney. That's how I saw him. He said that Alex Murdaugh told him, I have $500,000 insurance. And what he never mentioned was that he also had $5 million in an umbrella policy. So about June 2021, family members told Tony Satterfield, hey, the media is reporting that Alex Murdaugh settled this case. And he said, well, I don't know anything about it. And they said, well, you might want to follow up on that, try to figure out what's going on. So he calls Alex in June 2021 and he says, you know, what's happening? Alex tells him, well, we're making progress. And he said, I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get you boys a little money. I'm hoping for $100,000 for each of you. And he said, we're still making progress, hope to get it settled and done by the end of the year. What Alex didn't say, according to the prosecution, was that he had actually settled the case, already done, settled the case for $505,000 plus $3.8 million under the umbrella policy. He didn't say anything about that. He also did not tell the Satterfields that he was getting them a structured settlement through Forge. And in fact, apparently he really was not getting them a structured settlement. We went through that yesterday. Alex Murdaugh, there is a structured settlement company called Forge Consulting, and they regularly do structured settlements for clients who need that, who are underage or need help managing money. That's a thing that they regularly do. But Alex Murdaugh made an account called Richard Alexander Murdaugh doing business as Forge, and then had his firm write checks to Forge thinking that they were buying structured settlements. Instead, it was going straight to this account. And the next witness I'll tell you about says, yeah, it went straight from there into Alex Murdaugh's personal accounts. And that's what he did with the Satterfield money. There was this great question. Did you give him permission to steal your money? No. Like that was a surprise, right? And he said he never got 1 cent before all of this happened. But by now, as of today, Alex Murdaugh confessed judgment, admitted to taking money, and he's gotten apparently some money. The defense said, look, the defense was really working on should the judge admit this in the murder trial? I don't think they have anything much to combat this. If Alex, in fact, confessed judgment, then what that means is that Alex has no real defense. He's already admitted it. So what they're working on is, look, we don't really know when this happened. And we don't know that it had anything to do with putting pressure on Alex Murdaugh in June that would cause him to crack and kill his wife and son. And that's the argument that the prosecution is making. So he's saying, the defense is saying, this, we don't know the timing of this because Satterfield couldn't remember exactly when in June. And the defense was saying, well, maybe, you know, cell phone records could be looked at, and that may be something that they go to, but it was unclear. There was no direct testimony that this happened before the murders. And so again, the prosecution argument, I think, would be, look, he still knew it. He still knew he had taken all this money from the Satterfields. And so he knew he had done something wrong. Although at this stage, they had no idea that he had done something wrong. The next witness was a forensic accountant named Carson Burney from the South Carolina AG's office. He was asked to trace Alex Murdaugh's funds. And that has to have been a serious task because it's unbelievable, the Byzantine set of corporations that he described. He looked at, for example, at the $792,000 that came from Chris Wilson's IOLTA to Alex personally and traced that around. There were also some other things that were really interesting. For example, there were $507,000 of payments to Cousin Eddie. And bizarrely, it wasn't just payments to Cousin Eddie, but payments to 10 different variations on the name Curtis Edward Smith. C.E. Smith, C. Edward Smith, just different names like that. So 10 different ways to pay him this money, all of which added up to $507,000. Now, who is Cousin Eddie? You may be saying, why do we care about Cousin Eddie? Well, Cousin Eddie is the person Alex Murdaugh hired to shoot him, Alex Murdaugh, in the head. What? You say, but Alex Murdaugh is here. Yes, according to Alex Murdaugh and his own admission, he says they were attempting to commit insurance fraud, that Alex Murdaugh wanted to be killed. If he committed suicide, his son Buster wouldn't get the $10 million life insurance policy. So he got Cousin Eddie to shoot him in the head while he was changing a tire on the side of the road. But in fact, Cousin Eddie, I guess, missed or intentionally missed. In any event, Alex Murdaugh was not significantly wounded and went on to, actually, he then went from the hospital to drug rehab, yet another issue in the case. But Cousin Eddie is obviously a suspicious character because Alex Murdaugh already hired him to do illicit things, to commit insurance fraud with him. So then the question is, what is all this money to Cousin Eddie for? Because it was over time. Was it for drugs? Because Alex Murdaugh said he was a drug addict. Is that what he was doing? Was he paying for murder? What was he paying Cousin Eddie for? And there were no answers to that, just the statement that that much money was paid to Cousin Eddie. He also talked about tracking the Satterfield money that went into the fake Forge account that was really an Alex Murdaugh account doing business as Forge, and then tracked it out of that into Alex Murdaugh's various other accounts. So that was what we got to hear that they didn't get to hear. Now I want to look at, and then I want to do a little preview of Monday because we found out some information about what's going to happen on Monday. Let me look through real quick and see if there's any question that I missed. I've been trying to kind of watch as I went through. And if you have one and you want it nailed, then go ahead and put some question marks at the beginning. It'd be a little easier for me to see. So Monday preview. Monday should be awesome because I believe they're going to bring the lawyers on Monday. That's Alex Murdaugh's former law partners who are going to talk about theft directly from them, directly from the firm, how they found out about it. And it's now been admitted. The judges said, I'm admitting that because on the day of the murders, you were confronted by the accountant. She was sort of the business manager for the law firm. and she confronted you and said, we believe you've been stealing. And so at that point, that was directly related to his state of mind on the day of the murder. So the judge said that part's coming in. Some of this other stuff, we don't know yet whether the judge is going to let that in, whether he's going to say things that fell apart later, but that Alex Murdaugh knew were problematic, that those have something to do with this case. We don't know yet whether that's going to come in. We also know that the prosecution asked for a private conversation with one of Murdaugh's law partners before he testifies. They admitted they had known about a conversation for a while, and they didn't bring it up because it might be subject to the attorney-client privilege. Apparently, there was a private conversation. There was a conversation between Alex Murdaugh and this law partner and the defense lawyer presently representing Alex Murdaugh right now. One of them, there are several, but one of the defense attorneys. They were all together and they were all talking, and the prosecution wants to ask the law partner about this private conversation. And you might say, well, why is that not attorney-client privilege? Well, the argument is that the law partner was not representing Alex Murdaugh. And if you have a private conversation with somebody, if you have a private conversation with your lawyer and you bring a third party in, it destroys the attorney-client privilege. So they're saying the fact that this other lawyer was here meant that this attorney-client privilege didn't apply because you were willing to say it to a third party who didn't represent you. It's not confidential. It's not privileged. Maybe it's not privileged. So that is what they wanted to do. The judge said, and of course the defense said, well, you can't do that at the last minute like this. You're basically taking a deposition privately at the last minute in the middle of trial. You can't do that. The judge said, give me a memo on it in case law, and I'm going to rule. I'm going to rule on Monday, and then I'll, make my decision then. Really, really want to know what that is. I assume that attorney must have told somebody, because how else would they even know about this conversation? But they want to get some private conversation about it. I saw some question marks come in, and now I'm having trouble finding them. Oh, I may not be going. Oh, there we go. He already, this is a good question that C-Web asked. Although, let me give you one answer. He says, okay, he's already admitted to the embezzlement, so he's going to do time. So why would he kill his family? And I think it's a timing thing, because at the time of the murders, June 2021, he hadn't admitted to embezzling anything, and the empire had not yet fallen. No one really knew about this. Things were starting to come unraveled, and the law firm confronted him that day. So the law firm realized that $792,000, they were trying to figure out, where's this check? And that happened the day of the murders. So but as far as the question of doing time, since the death penalty isn't involved in this case, it really may not change the amount of time he serves. The prosecution already said he's facing life in prison, 99 crimes, financial crimes. So there's a good chance, no matter what, he spends the rest of his life in prison. But for this particular issue, I think it happened prior to the admission. And the CFO was asked about Alex owning the beach house. This is to D. Dolan. But as I understood it, the defense lawyer said, well, didn't Alex own the beach house too? Didn't they both own it? And the CFO was like, nope, it was Maggie only. I don't know the answer. There was obviously a different belief, and you saw Alex Murdaugh go, no, that's not right, shaking his head at the table. So I'm guessing that really didn't happen. I'm sorry. I'm losing my train of thought. I'm guessing that only Maggie owned it because of what the CFO said, but that is not what Murdaugh's table thought. And if they may bring more evidence of that in order to show who actually owned it. Oh, Southern Charmer went to the courthouse. Oh, that's fascinating. I think that would be really, really interesting. And Shayna Letter is talking about who would have received the life insurance. I don't know. There's been no evidence in the case about the life insurance. This is just what I had heard. And there's probably not going to be, because that incident happened after this case and it wasn't anything related to him. It's another thing he did. It's another thing he's accused of and even admitted to, the potential insurance fraud. And his reasoning, his statement at the time, as I understood it, was he wanted the money to go to his son. If it went to his law partners, he really made a mistake there. That was really for no reason at all. However, he doesn't seem seriously injured. He seems to be intact and sitting, despite the fact that he supposedly was shot in the head. So last question, parting question is, I want to know which way you're leaning right now. If you had to decide today and there was no more evidence in the case, what would you say? Would you say guilty? Would you say not guilty? I'm just super interested and would really like to hear more about that. So don't forget to like and subscribe, because you do not want to miss any of this case. And I will see you in the next video.